Hi, everyone. Let a couple of people come in. Some of you did have the opportunity to hear Cristina Rivera Garza and Fady. Fady, I didn't ask you if it's Joudah or Joudah. Joudah to speak. You heard them speak earlier today, and so it is kind of a really distinctly special opportunity for me to be able to sit here with them again after hearing them. So I just wanted to give a moment for folks to sit down. It's been a really wonderful day here at JLF. At the very beginning of the day, Sanjoy, invited us to stop and think and visualize home, think about the meaning of art. A little bit earlier today in conversation with Cristina, my colleague Jose Aranda began with a really beautiful land acknowledgement, inviting us to think about our relationship to this place and others' relationships to this place and our inheritance and our debts and our relationships. I can't quite repeat either of those, but I thought we could maybe just take a moment to acknowledge everything we've heard today and everything that we haven't heard today. I know that I've had moments of, real excitement and humor and levity. There's also always, the cognitive dissonance and pain of listening, for example, to Cristina talk about her beautiful book, Liliana's Invincible Summer, after a student on my own campus at Rice University last week was murdered, a young person full of promise in an instance of femicide at home. Thinking and reading Fady's poems, some of which you're going to hear today during an ongoing genocide. We are all living in this in a time of, I think, extreme cognitive dissonance. So if we could just sit for a second while I collect my notes, and we will be able to then read and hear and think together. My uncle Shashi spoke earlier today too, and he's not here, so I can take issue with something he said. He made a comment, I think, and he can take issue with what I said later, but there was a conversation about translation that happened, in which what I heard a little bit was focus on the losses in translation. I don't know if either of you heard that session, but there was a conversation about translation as loss. I'm being a little reductive here, but you're both writers who have been translated. Fady, you translate between English and Arabic. Cristina, you write in both English and Spanish. And so I wanted to start by asking you both to share a little bit about translation with us, your philosophy of translation, and its relationship to your concept of poetry. It was very interesting earlier today to hear, Fady, you talk about science as a third language. I'm curious about that phrase, third language, actually, even more than I am asking you about science. I know that, Cristina, you have written in a wonderful piece that was translated as exophonic alphabets about the second language, and you've written that all writing happens in the second language. So I'm wondering if you could help us, either one of you who's willing to take the bait first, to think a little bit about what translation is, how we can think about sort of that old commonplace that things are lost in translation. What does that mean? What is loss? What is gain? If you could help us think about that.
Thank you. Well, by third, it was more for me because Arabic and English, so this was a third language. I can't claim French or Spanish but yes, it's another language, or ultimately a second language. A while back, in my relationship to translation, in my relationship to Arabic, which as a thing I grew up living with, and becomes increasingly difficult to maintain in an English sphere that does not have any true association with Arabic on a daily basis, other than dehumanization perhaps, or exotification, in the sense that, for example, Spanish is alive in the Americas and well, and long it will continue. So my relationship to Arabic on a personal level was related to this notion of loss on a as I say in one of the poems, on a level that identifies the language I first learned love in. And it just becomes so powerful to realize that that's the language my mother spoke to me, my parents, and so forth. I learned love about life in general, the music of poetry or so forth was through that. So I didn't want to lose that. But the loss that we speak of when we speak of translation, I would like to be provocative and say that it is somewhat a masculine or a patriarchal form of loss. Because I stopped a while back thinking that humans, we just happen to be vehicles for alphabets. That in the end, yes, of course there are differences, and you can say this in this language and you can't quite say it this way in that language, but in the end, the attachments are always about a sense of, I don't know why can't think of the words, superiority or inferiority. And I don't encounter those when I engage translation. But to even, I think, I would like to say something more. It's complicated because there's a lot of politics of translation, and I think of translation as a biologic imperative. So all that you are and all that I am are in translation. At the cellular level, we're translated. The DNA is replicated, and then it moves to the RNA, and then for the cell to have any meaning in life and any function in life, it has to translate those strands into proteins. And so we use that expression. And it hit me that in the end, that all we engage in when we talk about translation of literature or a form of communication is really just about celebrating life. Of course, it's too naive not to divorce this from the politics of reception of translation and so forth, and which, they tend to dominate the way we receive certain texts and writers and languages and so forth.
And of course, it has to be said, we are having this conversation in English as, a global translational apparatus that has brought so many other language literatures, into the Anglophone world, but also has, done all kinds of violence, right, to other languages, and rendered some languages, right, even just the appearance of the language, suspect or other in interesting ways. So yes, big questions that we haven't asked yet. But Cristina.
Yeah, sure. Buenas tardes. ¿Cómo están? Yeah, so Spanish is alive and well, you were right. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here with you, Fady, as well. I truly admire your work, and thank you for being in Houston now at Rice University. I tend to think, I'm under the impression that translation is at the origin of it all. I don't think in biological terms necessarily, although I quite take your thoughts on that. But in terms of literary writing, I tend to believe that translation is first. And then, as a result of the translating, we get somehow to the notion of the original. I've been translated many times. I worked very closely with teams of women translators mostly, and the notion of co-authoring or co-writing comes very close to that experience. So I don't think of translation as creating a copy or a duplicate, but mostly working closely with language to produce a similar kind of reverberation or similar kind of energy, I think, that we can move from from geographies, across borders and boundaries as well. And I've developed a very dynamic and very organic and very loving relationship with my translators. And we also fight, of course, and we don't agree very often. And we wake up, I tend to wake up in the morning thinking, now I get that word, I know which one we need, and I'm calling them at ungodly hours in the morning. Things like that go on. And I think that's part of the dynamic. The collaboration, a deep sense that whatever we do, we're doing together and belongs equally and rightfully to all of us. I've translated too, mostly from English into Spanish, and not mostly, only. And I'm not a professional, I always say that. I'm just someone who falls in love with certain pieces, and I just want my friends to share into this richness, and I've been translating authors that I just admire, and I want them to bring them home, so to speak. I've been thinking a lot about translating and grief lately. I spoke recently, earlier, about Liliana's Invincible Summer. It's a book in which I explore the femicide that Cristina Rivera Garza, my younger sister, was victim of in 1990. And this is a book that I wrote both in English and in Spanish at the same time. I don't describe this process as a process of translation. I wrote this book at the same time in both languages. I've been living in the United States for a long, long time, more than 30 years, and but this is the first time that I had the need of doing this, and I didn't know exactly why I was doing it when it was happening. I just would wake up in the morning, I would get ready to write, and some days I would start writing in English, and some days I would start writing in Spanish, and I just decided to follow the process. And later, now looking back, I'm thinking that writing in English allowed me a certain psychological, spiritual protection, so to speak. I was, after all, describing events, actions that had happened, had taken place in a different language, in Spanish. And even though I can say and I can do a range of things in Spanish, some of them, specifically the ones related to this story, were extremely painful. And I think at that point, English lent its hand and allowed me to walk through those emotions with a sense of safety, so to speak. So I think I need to think more about grieving, translation, bilingualism, time. But there is something there. There is something that is being really relevant for me in the writing of this book, and I bet it's going to be increasingly relevant in future projects.
Did you want to respond to that, Fady? Or you don't have to.
Not to it. It's beautiful. I love the how you're so situated in as a self in translation and the way you describe it. I will share that English in particular has a somewhat of a derogatory view toward the Arab translator, because it's one way to emphasize that originality belongs elsewhere when it comes to the Arab. And of course, translation in general is exactly like Cristina said. You learn from it that there is no origin point that is specific to anyone or any people. And of course, ironically, I've written about this in an essay about Borges, where I say that the sort of the monotheistic religions, it's like God coming through, like, well, we tried first in Hebrew, it didn't work. We'll try in Aramaic, and you try in Arabic, and it didn't work. And you know, and this concept growing up, you know, in the Quran, where the verse says, "We only reveal to you what we reveal to people before you." So the idea of, or the obsession of antecedents or originality is removed from the concept of translation as a human language. Is one way that I engage translation as an Arab or a Palestinian in English.
No, thank you both so much. And I think, you know, there's so much more to be said. We should do a class together on translation studies, all of us in the audience here. You know, I think it's what's very clear from both of your comments, if I can say as a shorthand, is that translation is, of course, about so much more than you know, meaning. It's not just a question of what does this word mean, right? But so much more that comes from and through and with a language, the experiences, the events, all kinds of sedimented and embedded, you know, feelings and more. It's not just obviously about meaning. I want to ask, I know we are here to hear poetry, but I wanted to ask you both one more thing before I invite Fady to share some poetry with us. A poet and an essayist and friend of mine, Brandon Shimoda, likes to say that, you know, one is not a poet when one is writing poetry, but when one is reading poetry. And I've been thinking a lot about that line, and I wanted to ask you, you can take either question, but I want to know, like, what it means for you to be a poet. So, like, what is a poet, or what is a poem?
I'm going to let you.
Oh my gosh. By the way, I love Brandon's work. It's fantastic. Yeah, I've been quoting him a lot lately too. You know, I've been writing poetry ever since I began writing, and yet the books that I tend to talk more about are novels and short stories, and so I've been always very cautious about that name, that description, the job of a poet. Perhaps because it's daunting, it's incredibly complex. There's so much out there. But it's not only that. In my work, I've been mixing genres. I've been working with you know, novels that sound and are built with not necessarily on narrative devices, or that are not necessarily linked to plot. And I've been working with short stories that might as well be read as poetry, essays that are written in verse. So trying to interrogate the boundaries of genre is something that I'm very prone to do. And that's another reason why the word poet or poem, it's hard for me to touch upon, to capture, so to speak. So when I'm asked this question, I usually go for the thought that unlike when we are asked socially, when we think of a novel, we are put in a position as readers that we need to get something, we need to understand something. There is an action, there is an unfolding of meaning, which is the meaning of narrative, and then something is happening. And in that position, us readers are supposed to be getting at that. And it seems to me that when we talk about poetry, the situation changes dramatically. That you can read a poem and say, I don't know what I read. I'm moved by it, and I'm shocked by it, and that's it. And I think as a form, socially, this is a place that we go to when we want to express that. We are moved, we are perhaps transformed radically, we are radically in touch with someone else, with some other materials as well. And we don't need necessarily to pinpoint, we don't need to define in strict ways. I don't know what you think about that, but to me that is a liberating sensation, but at the same time is frightening. Yeah. And just getting to swimming those waters could be, I don't know, it's hard.
Yeah, I could just listen to you talk for 20 more minutes about this. It's very lovely. I think that poetry somehow is one particular or maybe major, but I don't know about the temporality of it, temple of language in the mind, in the soul, and it brings us back continually or constantly to our relationship to what it means to be alive, or what it means to be a being. And to be a being is not always about having meaning in the way that we're quite constructed to have, or instructed to have meaning and to seek it all the time. That doesn't mean necessarily that poetry is about, nonsense. But it's interesting that the meaning of the nonsense in poetry happens through music. Going back to Brandon, who's absolutely a brilliant soul. I find that when I'm writing, I'm a different person than when I suddenly have to read, to receive myself again as my own stranger in the work. And it is for me about the pleasure of the music. It's like trying to click back to a oneness in my mind that has to do, that twins music and language again. And humans, we're obsessed with the fact that we are linguistic animals. And almost to the point, well, not almost, purely to the point of both madness and narcissism. We're the ones, the whole universe exists around us, and every thought we have and every feeling is so special. And so poetry really, I think, sometimes just meets that head on, brings the line back to the point. Yeah.
Fady, would you share some of your poetry with us?
It'll be more disappointing than.
I think it's on, so you can read from the podium.
Not everyone is a physician, but sooner or later, everyone fails to heal. In Gaza, a girl and her brother rescued their fish from the rubble of airstrikes. A miracle, its tiny bowl didn't shatter. And out of nowhere, a girl receives an ovation from her rescuers, all men on their knees and bellies, clearing the man-made rubble with their bare hands, disfigured by dust into ghosts. All disasters are natural, including this one, because humans are natural. The rescuers tell her she's incredible, powerful, and for a split second, before the weight of her family's disappearance sinks her, she smiles like a child who lived for 7 years above ground receiving praise. Plumb line. For the longest time, I heard it as plumb line. I adore a perfect fruit, its flawless groove revealing division, remaining one. Your earth is lead that poisons the stream of my memory. Your phosphorus plumbs me to the bone. I know how it came to this. How did it? More than words you speak in silences that amplify white spaces in which white is not water. It smells. I can taste it. And water is life, closer to life than dirt and stone. Dirt and stone, is that what you love most to taste? I spin and raise my taste and smell into a love like water. How will I go on living with orchestras that conduct my thirst? It's been done before. There are precedents, always will be, and there will be Gaza after the dark times. There will be gauze, and we will all stand indicted for not standing against the word and our studies of the word that dissect what ceases to be water. Why do you crave plumbing the depths of dust so? Dust and ashes, I'm ahead of my time. My time is only mine when you're in it with an open heart. An open heart has 2 ears, 2 eyes, one set for breath, one for blood. And the dance between them grooved like a plum. I will survive, there is no better song. My body knows my memory is my keeper beyond the loss in which you're hooked on naming. Can you be water? One day you will be that kind of divine. You who remove me from my house are blind to your past, which never leaves you, blind to what's being done to me now by you, now dilatory, attritional, so that the crime is climate change and not a massacre, so that the present never ends. But I'm closer to you than you are to yourself, and this, my enemy friend, is the definition of distance. Oh, don't be indignant. Watch the video. I'll send you the link in which you cleanse me item after limb thrown into the street to march where my catastrophe in the present is still not the size of your past. Is this the wall you throw your dice against? I'm speaking etymologically. I'm okay with the scales tipping your way. I'm not into that. I have a heart that rots, resists, and hopes. I have genes like yours that don't subscribe to the damaged pyramid. You who remove me from my house have also evicted my parents and their parents from theirs. How is the view from my window? How does my salt taste? Shall I condemn myself a little for you to forgive yourself in my body? Oh, how you love my body, my house. Hummingbird. which is also a nod for what the hummingbird is for the indigenous people and myth of so many in North America. Who here has not loved like no one else in the world has before them or since? Your blood wondering what more it can open up in your skin, all the light rushing in like a fool through the tiniest holes the invisible pores. And then love ended. You returned to yourself. Who here has not lived the passing of all thinking through the language of love? I'll finish with this longish piece called Stick Figures. The petals were phone number tags of an ad for a roommate on the bulletin board in the department's hallway. Then the petals were between yes and no. The tags were bangs, bumper stickers, sticky labels, tear-off strips for runways and runaways during war. Everyone loves a winner. I'll be loved by a few. They will be forgotten as I will be forgotten. The petals belong to my people who, like any other people, are capable of, incapable of, given time, the great provider. I sketch horror like children draw stick figures. I distill the body in mass graves. Sticks and bones break my heart of stone. A heart of stone pays the mind, and a heart of water has let the mind go. According to the testimonies, the trees were leafing through documents. The birds had transferred to better schools. The petals were corpses that made a bridge, corpses that turned a wadi red, a river ink. The petals had names: ordinary citizen turned beast, ordinary citizen period, majority souls silent and silenced, the tree next door for uprooting, the tree that palms a scoop from the river, whales we nudge to suicide, a willow sounding the barrier reef. Say, when will the madness end? I asked the petals, but they were between yes and no. That's where the children headed, between yes and no, to do the asking themselves. The petals answered or kept to themselves. The petals spoke only to bees and such. They spoke to us, the children clarified, through bees and such. And what did the bees and such hear? We did not have their ears, the kids replied, but there were also ants around, they said. The ants told the worms to tell the birds to bounce back. The petals were starlings, grackles in a football field on a middle school morning shelter. The fog told the grackles the worms were looking for roommates. The petals ate the worms. The tags wore big toes in rows of yes and rows of no. The petals kept my toes warm. Thank you.
Thank you, Fady. I want to ask you one question before Cristina reads, and it's a question actually inspired by something Cristina said in conversation with Jose, which was about the fact that your book Liliana's Invincible Summer was written with your sister and in sisterhood. And so Fady, I'd like to ask you, also in light of the earlier comments you both made about collaboration and connection and translation, who is with you when you are writing poetry?
Half facetiously, but also truthfully, my own madness is my best friend in quiet hours. I am, I'm reluctant to answer the question.
Then don't.
No, I mean, I will answer it by saying I'm reluctant in the sense that I am heavily burdened and in deep grief constantly. I wrote a few years ago an essay that really focused. The title of it is not what my friends title it, and my friends title the essay as Palestine in English. And I think that I live in a space and a language in which I feel like I am a Cassandra. I am not feverish. I do speak Trojan and I do speak Greek. I don't have hallucinations. I don't have seizures. But the logical so-called clairvoyance is not clairvoyance at all. It's just a simple thing in front of your eyes. And to realize that you're the only one seeing it, and everybody else either dismisses you or dehumanizes you or kills you or gouges your eyes out, is exhausting. So sometimes I have to live with how to live less with these things in my private hours, those feelings. And also, as I said earlier, to live with, the way I read is always the way I first encountered poetry in my life, which is to say, I know how this looks on the page in English, but I know how this sounds as if it is written in Arabic in my head, so I get to read it as if I'm still the boy who first encountered that primal human experience of what poetry is, the music of language in the mind. And I hope that's a partial answer.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that boy with us. Cristina, would you share some poetry with us?
You know, I was saying earlier today that I talked about Liliana's Invisible Summer for the first time in Houston, here at this place. And I appreciate the opportunity very much. And I'm going to be reading poetry translated into English for the first time in Houston. So, yeah. I'm very glad about that, too. To first in one day. And of course, I'm going to be able to do this thanks to the work and the friendship and the complicity of fabulous, brilliant translators, Sheila Samuelson and Ilana Luna, both professors and writers on their own, and close friends of mine as of now. We are working on a volume of selected poetry. We don't even have a stable title yet. So I'm reading something that belongs to a larger project that we are looking for a title as I speak right now. I'm going to read 3 poems. They are roughly related to, they're very much rooted in territory. And the places that they tend to invoke are south of the border, very close to Mexico. But I believe that, that these are places that that haunt us and that we can see everywhere too. The third stop, this one has an epigraph by Milorad Pavic, his book, The Inner Side of the Wind. From this day on, we shall build. We shall flee and build fleeing. If you like, you may join me. Then go with your 2 gold coins in your beard. Let them be yours for the trip. Henceforth, at every third stop, I shall build anything, whatever I know how. And when all this rots under the relentless acid rain, when the largest city on earth lies diminished like a wrinkled parchment or like an ancient map charred along the edges, when the raiders have come and taken everything, and we have lost all that we were going to lose, dispossessed even of our bones, someone will sing to the disaster. And the human remains, the faithful departed, will jangle their keychains of froth and code. And the incense, the feminists, the forged in fire, will find solace beneath the transparent trees of their own hands. And we, survivors, will emerge to cry softly for the beast that died alone within the confines of its chambers, victim of who knows how many crimes. And we who remain will laugh with my dead sister, and with dead Joaquin, and with Marco Antonio, now forever dead. And we, the stubborn, will steal 40 times over the same books that we were taught to steal 40 different ways. And we, the lunatics, the stone-cold crazy, the pirate queens, the pre-war cripples, the weirdos, the fairies, the druggies, the women with no children nor husband, the down and out, the forever voiceless, the good-for-nothings, the poets, the broken, we will wave the flag and spit copal up the puerile clouds. And they'll see us advancing like an army of rabid dogs, alive and dying of rage. A stupendous June sunrise. All these under the open mouth of the sky. All these under the whirlwind, blinded by sparks and echoes and blades. All these over the wide avenues in the death of night, so utterly alone and so irremediably forgotten. And we will bring terror upon them, and we won't ask for forgiveness, and we will forgive nothing. Maria Escovedo was killed while seeking justice for the femicide of her daughter. She was gunned down in front of the General Attorney's office in Chihuahua City. I heard the news some years ago, and I wrote this poem. A. You would need to understand something, to look at the sky, for example, to look at the palms of your hands and blindly feel your way forward. Sometimes it is necessary to touch a wall, and sometimes it is necessary to claw at a wall. The pain at the tips of your fingers, underneath your nails, the deadbolt of your fingers. The wall exists because of the echo that fills it out. The wall is against which? The wall is you're against which? The end of the line, isn't that right? What you really do is fall, and then, if possible, fall again, Reading is just one way of dropping to your knees. B. Speaking and crawling are often one and the same, which means touching the ground with your hands, which is not, like walking, a movement sane and articulated and vertical, which is to regress in time to invade childhood or injustice. Babbling, stumbling, which is to be broken, you must understand, say, hear, say, it hurts, repeatedly, which means I won't get up, which is to beg for them to be returned alive, to crawl, you win, understand, falling to your knees is the main event. C. When praying, one kneels, one pleads, one begs, let them return alive, one murmurs, let them find their way home, let them hear me, not terrorized, no. One moves their lips so softly, so sweetly, so silently. The opposite of confession is the offering, the inverse of the fingernail. D. One who keeps praying in their body beneath the vaulted dome, deep in the fog. See also genuflection, adoration, reverence. See also fear. Feel also the terror. You must understand something. Looking at your empty hands, for example, feeling the weight of the body that isn't there. Clawing, which is growling with your fingers, trembling, mortifying. A wall is also a thing made of mist. E. The one who asks for, or the many who ask for, the many who come together to join hands and pray. Supplication is an infinite action. The mother who sees through her daughter's shroud, the sister who waits, an uncle or cousin who breaks down, a spectral circle. We must unearth a door in the center of the wall, a doorknob at the edge of a rectangle, a tiny key, a drain, the hand that thrusts, the step that is taken. F. Falling, which is to always fall again. Repetition like the echo, or the shadow of the echo, or the stain of the shadow of the echo. Yesterday, I lit 425 candles. Consuming is a way of producing time. This is the wax with which I remake your neck, your mouth, your hair. G. We must understand something, or see something, or definitely fall face down onto something. Faith is a matter for walls or for the blind. We who whisper, let our women return alive. Let them come back. We who turn the key. We who ask, who is there? And I'm going to end with, oh my gosh. Yes. I'm going to end with a poem whose title is The Feminists. And it was very important to me to write this poem. It's an old poem. I wrote it when I lived in TJ in Tijuana. Back then, during the early 21st century, feminism was, I described it as the F word in Mexico. If you wanted to be taken seriously, you couldn't use this word to describe yourself. So that's the reason I wanted to call this poem precisely The Feminists. They pronounced the word, they spit it out, they celebrated it, they ran. Behind this term, one must hear the rushing of the wind. They would speak against the grain, interrupting one another, so shamelessly. They lived out in the open, which is the same place where they felt. I imagine they were born that way. They knew not of refuge, roofs, shelter, or patronage. They were wounded by everything, and everything here means history, air, the present tense, the subjunctive, the context, the fugue. Agnostic more than atheist, striking more than beautiful, vulnerable more than weak, alive more than you, more than myself, stoic more than strong, lucky more than luck. Intolerant? Sure, sometimes. Did I already mention that they were brutal? They would march on days of wrathful clarity like muses of their own. This would happen mostly in winter when the Santa Ana winds came and went along the boulevards of Tijuana, sweeping along plastic wrappers and dust that makes you shut your eyes and deny reality. On the edge of everything, tittering, they were the last drop clinging to the bottle, the mythic one of happiness, or even more mythical, the one that spills from the glass and from the sex, impenetrable in the selfhood of its orifice. And they were falling. The last straw, the be-all and all, the end of the line. Underneath these phrases, one must smell the stench left behind by the horizontal wind. I imagine that it was only with time that they became this way. With men or without them, they would kiss labiodentally, and they would move house and change their socks and cook rice. And they go down the stairs and take taxis and feel no compassion. They would say, "This is the wind that purifies everything." And they would pronounce the word, emphatic, tenacious, prehuman, cutting, yes, frequently, poignant more than delusional, prophetic more than conscious, subreptitious more than critical, hypertextual, plain spoken. I'm sure I mentioned that they were brutal. They would smoke unequivocally. They could turn the page with the meticulous care and devotion of lovers. They were always in love. In the parched Santa Ana days, they would lift their faces and dedicate themselves to watching. They could spend hours like that. Those birds that above their heads soared lucidly against the antagonism of air. And the Santanas, and here one must hear over and over the word, over and over, would then undo their vast, fierce head of hair, their bloody eyelashes, over and over the word. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cristina. Since I asked Fady a question inspired by something you said, I want to ask you something inspired by a couple lines from Fady's collection. There were a couple of lines in Fady's collection that you didn't read today where you write, Fady, "I am removing me from the we of you, and you will be when we be." I'm very interested in we. And in Cristina, in your work also, there is we. In Not Terrorize, No, the final lines, we who turn the key, we who ask, who's there. And some of your other work that you shared also, we repeats. And I know there's a part of me that's, one of the logical questions is, who is we? But I'm also wondering, what is we in your poetry?
Well, I said earlier something that I deeply believe, and is that I don't write in solitude. Every time that I work with language, I am in fact getting in touch with entire generations of experience. And I am discussing, dissenting, or agreeing with traditions that go well beyond my experience as an individual. And to me, writing is that privileged place. In many ways, that's the we. That is not a unit in its own. It's not something that exists that precedes writing. I guess I'm thinking about the connection, reaching out. Alberto mentioned that word earlier today. The insistence of reaching out and the faith that this reaching out could be accomplished. I guess that we is. It's a provocation in many ways. And I'm happy thinking that writing is that place of a radical critique and a constant provocation, so that something might exist in the world that is not yet there, but we might help, we might contribute for this other connection to exist along us.
I don't really want to follow that. I said I don't really want to follow that, right? But I know I also have to let everybody go soon. I haven't been given any signs yet, but so I'm going to permit myself a last question on behalf of the audience about love, which you both have talked about and written about. Fady, you have said love is a human right. I've read in interviews. Cristina, you've written so much about love in your poetry, in your Pulitzer-winning book. Both of you have written about the deformation of love by violence. Can there be poetry in the absence of love?
Well, I do have in one of the poems in the book this kind of dance, the Trinity dance between life, language, love,
Yes,
love,
yes,
language,
yes.
life, love, life, language. And,
Musical chairs.
Yeah. I mean, it's I think the answer is simply not, because even if one wants to construct an answer that yes, it's possible to have poetry in the absence of love, then we'd have to specify what kind of love are we talking about being absent. One can be, I can be provocative or cynical, and say that, love can also be a force for for not good, and so it is who we are as humans. So I don't think that love, for better and worse, is ever absent. This is I think it's a. I'm sure. Once you say that, then there's a philosophical mind that says, "Aha!" But here's the point. But yeah.
You're right. I've been thinking a lot about love, specifically in relation to Liliana's Invincible Summer. I mentioned in the book that one of the major discussions that I had with my sister was precisely about the nature of love. I was always very suspicious about love, and time has gone by, and now I've realized that I was very suspicious about certain kinds of love, about romantic love, the promise much, but delivers realities that are not necessarily loving, right? And all throughout my life, I thought that my sister and I would stand on opposite sides of that definition of love. And what I've learned after reading Liliana's Invincible Summer and some of the poetry that you've heard today is that perhaps I have much to learn about their own sense, the potency of love that Liliana and many of my friends have seen in it. Liliana was always talking about this love as a radical force, almost as a translation of freedom. it was a potency in itself. And in that kind of love, I can join them right there. I've been thinking about that. I've been dismantling my own notions and suspicions about other ranges, other experiences of love. But I think that one, that force, that energy, that palpitating existence, that's something that I embrace, I welcome, and I take as a challenge as well.
Thank you both so much. I just want to say that I feel very lucky to be contemporaneous with you both, reading, hearing you. Thank you for sharing your words with us. You can clap now. Sorry, I'm done. Thank you both so much.